think the little clap part is my favorite part of the whole setup, so I'm just going to keep it in there. But if you follow me on Instagram or LinkedIn, then you already know that yes, I am starting a podcast about business and entrepreneurship, but my take on it. So you can take what you want from that. But when I was kind of planning out what I was going to talk about or say, I thought there might be at least one person that's not my friend or related to me that will stumble upon this. And they might think, why in the world should we listen to her? And I'm not saying that you should listen to me, but I want to start this whole thing just giving a little background on my story and my personal experiences within the entrepreneurial, it's a hard word to say, entrepreneurial world. We'll work on that. So I'm going to have to go back pretty far into the archives and talk about when I was 18, which I'm just kidding, that was only 12. Oh my gosh, 12 years ago. Ooh. So when I was 18, I decided that I wanted to start a nonprofit, which I tried to think back in my mind last night, like, what? You don't just think, hey, I'm going to start a nonprofit. Like, what was the real inspiration behind that for me at that age? And I really cracked up because I always I tell this story in front of people pretty often, but I give like the professional public speaking version of it. But when I really started writing down and thinking about the things that inspired me to start the nonprofit, they were pretty funny and actually pretty important. Like, there's key things that I learned from all three of these little things that I jotted down, even though when you first hear them, you're going to crack up and think, what the heck? Who is this girl? So I remember being 18, and there's the three distinct things that I watched on either the computer on YouTube or Netflix, I think Netflix, that sparked something in me. And the first one was actually a Taylor Swift documentary, which sounds embarrassing, but just follow me here. So I was watching this girl who we all know is probably the biggest pop star in the world at this point, but the documentary followed her from, I think, age 15 to where she was at that point, which would have been around 18, the same age that I was then. And I've just watched, I think it was the first time that I really seen somebody living out their dreams in front of me, even if it was just on a screen. And just the joy and the thrill that you could see from her, like creating something that she felt like was leaving a positive impact on the world and making people happy, like that just mesmerized me. And I remember thinking, like, what is different about her than me, other than the fact that she's a talented musician and singer and performer? Obviously, I am not any of those things, but what is it that she has that I don't have, in the sense of doing the things that I love? And I just kind of toyed with that in my mind for a long time, trying to figure that out, trying to answer that question for myself. And I came to find out that actually there was nothing any different in the sense of chasing the things that I was going to love and that were going to make me excited every day. Like, we had that same thing. We all have that inside of us. We all have the ability to chase the things that excite us. So that was the first thing that kind of sparked me, like, hey, I think I really want to do something different with my life and with my career. I just don't know what that is yet, but I want that feeling. So then the next thing was YouTube. So 12 years ago, I guess YouTube influencers and social media influencers weren't actually that big of a thing. They were just hitting the scene. So now I do feel like I'm 1,000 years old. But I remember these two girls that lived well, at the time I think they lived here, but they were from the same small town, Kingsport, Tennessee, and they started these YouTube beauty channels, and it was kind of the buzz around town for a little bit because people didn't do things like that around here. So they started making videos on YouTube about beauty stuff and stuff that excited them and topics that they were passionate about, and it blew up. And once again, I just really watched them do that, and the same question that I had when I was watching the documentary hit me again. Like, they are really doing what they want to do. Like, they look so happy. What's stopping me from finding my thing? And once again, I would have the thoughts like, well, you don't know it. Like, you're not excited about makeup and beauty and stuff like that. So that's not going to be your thing. But it was still me just watching them create something once again that they knew was going to leave an impact on somebody. And I loved it, fascinated by it. So those two instances were what got me going on this path. And so I really started thinking, like, what do I want to be known for? And what if I do something I love, like, what is that thing? And I started journaling and writing things down. And I remember, this is a little bit morbid, but I remember going to a funeral at some point in that time frame, and the preacher said, I can't preach this man's funeral. He already did that himself with his life. And just started telling stories about the impact that he had had. He was a teacher, and one of my teachers, actually. And I just thought, wow, like, if I were to die tomorrow or today, what would somebody say about me at my funeral? Like, if our lives preach that, and how we live is what people remember us by, like, what will people say about me? And so now I have this Taylor Swift documentary, these beauty guru girls, and this extremely morbid and powerful thought all swirling around in my mind. So confusion level 100 right there, but I didn't stop. So inspiration is a funny thing. Like, you never know where it's going to come from or what's going to spark it. So always keep your eyes open to whatever you're doing, whether it's a YouTube video or a Netflix documentary or just conversations with friends, because the next thing that happened to me was I went to see a movie with some friends, and all of these things happen over a few month time span. So I went to see a movie with some friends called The Blind Side, and probably most of you have seen that movie. It's awesome. If you haven't seen it, you need to watch it. It's so good and so inspiring. But the premise of the story is there's a family that adopts a kid that lived in just a less than ideal situation, and he ended up going to the NFL and creating this wonderful story. So within that movie, so I'm watching it, I'm super into it, I love the storyline, and then there's a part that I'll never forget that completely, absolutely changed my life, and it was, so they adopt Michael Orr, the Tui family, and they bring him into their home, and they take him up to a bedroom that's just full of stuff that most of us have grown up having, bed, TV, all of it. And they show him his room, and he's all excited, and he says, I've never had one of these before. And they were like, what, a room of your own? And he said, no, a bed. Oh my gosh. That movie scene absolutely wrecked me. I never cry in movies unless maybe an animal dies, something Fox and the Hound related. Never cry. Sometimes I worry myself with, like, the lack of emotion that I do have about things, but I started absolutely bawling, and I could not eat. So I suck it up because I don't want to be embarrassed in front of my friends, but the only thing I could think about from that point on was, why did that kid in that movie, like, why did they use that part? Why did he say he didn't have a bed? Is there people that don't have beds? Is there kids that don't have beds? Like, why? Because there's always a little truth to the things that you hear or see in movies. So I don't know, that thought just, I couldn't shake it. And so now I have the documentary, the YouTube beauty gurus that thought about, what if I die today? What are people going to say about me? And now I've watched this movie that's completely wrecked me because I'm paranoid that there's kids that don't have beds. So I really started thinking on all these things obsessively, and in that mix, I was about to graduate from high school too. So I'm like, what am I even doing with my life? Like, I don't have a clue. And so somehow, through a lot of prayer and a lot of just asking people close to me, like, about, how to figure out what your thing is, and I kind of started vocalizing these things that I had been thinking, and this whole bed situation, and through all of that, the idea was born that I would start a nonprofit that would give beds to kids in need, and that's what I did, which was crazy because, like I said, I was young, and I will say in my personal network, I didn't have anybody in my family that had done anything like that before. I have amazing family, amazing support. Like, they supported me, but they had no idea for me to even start or how to help me. So this is where I learned for the first time the power of using your voice. And you have to, when you find this thing that excites you, or you have this idea that you want to bring to life, like most of the time, you're not going to know how to do it. I don't think many people are just born knowing how to start a nonprofit. So I started just finding people, anybody that would listen to me, anybody that would talk to me. If it was one of the people was my best friend's dad, just really started identifying people that I could get in contact with easily that would listen to my story and would hopefully know how to help me start this. So if you take anything from that, I would say once you have your idea, start vocalizing it to anyone that will listen to you that you think can offer you some advice, because people want to see you succeed. There's going to be somebody in your life that wants to see you succeed and will really help you take those first steps. So for me, it was one of my best friend's dads and a lady from my church that's a social worker. So I really started talking to her about the bed situation because I knew that she worked in that world. And so when she told me, yes, actually, that's a huge problem. There's so many kids that don't have beds, and a lot of times we have to remove them from homes and different things like that for that reason. So right there, I knew, okay, this is a problem that I can solve. How do I solve it? And so my next step was to talk to my best friend's dad, who is a business owner. And I thought, if he can run a business, surely he can help me figure out how to start a nonprofit. And he did. He really took me under his wing and gave me the steps that I needed. Introduced me to a lawyer. I don't know why I said that so weird, but he introduced me to a lawyer and helped me create my 501c3 status, which is actually much easier. It's time consuming, but it's much easier than you would anticipate. And we started the nonprofit together. With his help, I started the nonprofit. And there's so much that happened once I started that. But in the end, I ended up providing over 1,000 beds to kids in need, scaled it into 4 different states, and had so many crazy adventures throughout that. But yeah, so I think the reason that I say all of this isn't to be like, oh, I started a nonprofit when I was 18, like I'm so cool. No, actually, it's 100% the opposite. I wanted to share this part of my story today because I am the most unlikely person that would have ever done something like that, would have ever started a nonprofit, would have ever put all these pieces together, because I had no experience, no prior knowledge of anything in this world. But once you find that thing that inspires you, you will figure it out. And if you talk to enough people, there'll be somebody that will help you. So I'm going to give like a little insight into what the next couple of episodes are going to entail, because this is the more glamorous, like, oh, that's so awesome part of the story. But we get into the weeds of like business and me doing a whole bunch of things wrong as the story goes on. There was some amazing times and some things I did do right, but there was probably far more that I did wrong that I learned some really good lessons from that I'm excited to talk about. So once I started the nonprofit, I did go to college in the midst of all this and ended up dropping out twice because I was so desperate to do beds for kids full time, but didn't really like know how. That's one thing I'll talk about. Second is I got super exhausted asking people for money constantly and writing grants. Writing grants is the worst thing I've ever done. Constantly having to depend on other people to give you money to support your passion is soul sucking. So yeah, I learned some lessons in that. Ended up starting a for-profit business called Throw to help fund the nonprofit, which it was a home goods company that like I said, gave back to the nonprofit. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about starting that business, and then I'm going to talk about when I decided to exit Beds for Kids and Throw, which was just 3 years ago, and talk about what that process looked like for me, which it was crazy. Honestly, that's one thing in my life that I can say I did everything wrong. Absolutely everything wrong, and learned so much. So I'm excited to kind of take you guys through those steps, and then, we'll circle back to where I am now, and hopefully somebody will have some questions that maybe I can help you through this process too. And if that's the case, please send me a message on, if you have my number, text me, LinkedIn me, Instagram me, whatever. If there's anything that I can help you with just based off what you've heard so far, I'm your girl. So, all right. We're at 15 minutes. I think that's enough for today, but I'm excited, guys. It's going to be awesome. So we'll talk soon.